Not every visit is a comfort. Some carry a duty being discharged. Some carry a need the visitor brought in with them. And yet, you went. You sat down. You talked. And you walked back out to your car feeling lighter than when you walked in, and never once asked whether they did. You told yourself you had done the right thing, and you had. And that is exactly why nobody ever corrected you. The room was quiet after you left, not peaceful. Quiet. Only one person in that room was able to feel the difference. Today I want to open your eyes to something the church rarely talks about. We teach believers that they ought to visit the sick. We almost never teach them how. We are going to talk about 7 things believers do at a sick person's bedside that keep costing long after the visit is over. Not 7 things that make you unkind. 7 ordinary acts done by people who mean well that take from someone with almost nothing left to give. By the end, you will recognize one of them as your own. Matthew chapter 25, verse 36 says, "I was sick and you looked after me." Most Christians read that as a command to show up, and it is. But notice what it does not say. It does not say I was sick and you encouraged me. It does not say I was sick and you explained it to me. It does not say you prayed the right words over me. Jesus put himself in the bed and measured the visit from there, not from the doorway. The test was never whether you came. It was what you were like once you were in the room. Visiting is not a kindness you perform. It is an hour that belongs to someone else, and you can spend it on them or take it from them. 1. Never arrive unannounced and turn a sick person into your host. Most of us believe the surprise is the gift. Asking first gives them a chance to say no, and we do not want them to say no, so we simply appear and call it devotion. Look at what actually happens. Somebody has to be presentable. Somebody has to clear the chair and apologize for the room. Somebody has to be grateful out loud while feeling something else. A person who cannot stand without help has just been handed a job, and the job is you. I have watched a woman spend the better part of an hour getting ready for a 20-minute visit she never agreed to. She was gracious throughout, and thanked them twice at the door. Then she slept the rest of the afternoon, and nobody who came that day knew what it had cost her, because she was far too kind to say so. Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, says, "Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interest of others." Paul is not describing a feeling. He is describing an order of operations, and yours goes second. Here is what many believers overlook. The question is never whether you would be welcome. It is what your welcome costs a body with nothing spare. 2. Never stay longer than their body can carry. This one feels like the opposite of a sin. You stayed. You did not rush off. You gave them your whole afternoon, and giving your time is supposed to be the good thing itself. But sickness runs on a small budget. There is only so much attention in a day, and conversation spends it faster than anything. They will not tell you when it runs out. They keep answering and smiling and holding up their end because the alternative is telling someone who drove across town that they are tired of them. Almost nobody can. So they pay until you leave. I remember a man visited every single day of a long illness by people who loved him. Not one of them stayed too long by their own reckoning. Together, they took every hour he had. His family began asking people to come later and stay shorter, and nearly everyone they said it to heard coldness. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 17 says, "Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you." That is not a verse about rudeness. It is a verse about arithmetic. The deeper lesson is this: leaving early is a form of love that will never once be thanked. 3. Never talk over them to whoever else is in the room. It starts as courtesy. There is a daughter by the window or a nurse at the door. It feels natural to ask whoever can answer easily, rather than the person who has to gather themselves to speak. But watch where the eyes go. Within minutes, there are 2 conversations, one about the sick person and one with them, and only one is running. They lie an arm's length away listening to themselves described, how they slept, what they ate, whether they are in good spirits. You would not do that in any other room of their life. Their illness did not make it acceptable, only easier. I sat once with a man who had not been addressed directly in the better part of an hour. He was awake and entirely himself. When somebody finally turned and asked him something, he answered perfectly well, then closed his eyes and did not open them again. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 13 says, "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame." That verse is usually preached about arguments. Very few apply it to a bedside, where the answer is given about a person instead of to them. Here is what most believers overlook. Being talked past is how a person learns they have already become a case. If you have recognized yourself in one of those three, friend, I would ask you to do two things. Subscribe to this channel and write in the comments, "I bring my presence, not my answers." Then stay with me, because the next four are the ones almost nobody is willing to name out loud. 4. Never fill the silence with your own sickness story. It comes from a good place. You want them to know they are not alone, so you reach for the closest thing you have, your own hospital, your own aunt who had the same thing and is fine now. But listen to what has happened to the room. They were the subject, and now they are the audience. They have to be interested and sympathetic and impressed that you came through it, and none of that is available to them. Worse, the ending you offered is a promise you cannot keep. I have watched a young woman in a hospital bed spend a visit nodding along to somebody else's recovery. She asked all the right questions. When they left, she said it had been lovely and meant it, and had said nothing true about herself. Job, chapter 16, verse 2 says, "I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all." Job's friends were not cruel. They could not sit in a room where nothing was being said. The deeper lesson is this: silence is not an emergency. It is often the only part of the visit that is theirs. Let it sit. I need to be very careful and very clear here, because this next one is the easiest to do without knowing you did it. 5. Never go hunting for the sin that caused it. Almost nobody says it outright. It arrives as a question, gently, sideways. Have you been under stress? Is there anything unresolved? Anyone you need to forgive? Any bitterness? Any unconfessed thing? Every one of those can be asked in love. But notice what a sick person hears. Lying there with nothing to do but think. They hear that somebody came to find the reason, and the reason is them. Once that is in the room, it does not leave, because every honest answer sounds like a confession. I knew a man who spent months of an illness quietly auditing his own life, not because anyone accused him, but because enough visitors had wondered aloud. He got worse for a while, not from the illness, from the searching. John chapter 9 verse 3 says, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." The disciples asked whose fault it was. Jesus refused it. Here is what many believers overlook. You are not the investigation, and neither are they. 6. Never promise a healing God has not promised. This one is spoken with real faith behind it. You are going to be fine. God told me you will come through this. I have prayed, and I know. But a promise has to be kept by somebody. When you make one on God's behalf, you put His name on an outcome you cannot see, and hand a person in a bed something that may come apart. If it does, they will not conclude that you were wrong. They will conclude that God was, or that they did not believe enough. I have watched what happens in a family after a promise like that fails. The grief was survivable. What took years was the quiet question underneath about whether they had failed to believe enough, and nobody who made it was still there to answer. James chapter 4, verse 15 says, "Instead you ought to say, 'If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that.' That is not a smaller faith. It is faith that does not make God sign what He has not said." The deeper lesson is this: you may promise them your presence, that one is yours to keep. 7. And this is the one that matters most because it sits underneath the other 6. Never go for the sake of your own conscience. This one is mine, and it may be yours. You knew you ought to go. It had been sitting on you for weeks, so you went, and the moment the door closed behind you, something eased in your chest, and what eased was not concern for them. There is nothing wrong with a conscience that sends you. That is what it is for. But watch what a visit becomes when relief is what you came for. You go once, because once settles it. You go on the day that suits you. I once knew a man whose room was full for 3 weeks and empty by the 4th month. Nobody who stopped coming had done anything wrong. Each had gone, been kind, and been troubled by nothing since. Matthew chapter 6 verse 1 says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them." The audience does not have to be other people. It can be you. Here's the question worth sitting with. When you leave a sick room, are you relieved or still carrying them? I want to say something important before we close. Nothing here says you should stop going. Do not hear 7 reasons to stay away, because an awkward visit from someone who came is worth more than a perfect one that never happened. Every one of these is done by people who love someone and did not know what to do with their hands. That is not wickedness. If you have done all 7, you are not the villain of this message. You are most of us. Go back. Sit down. Ask nothing. Stay less time than you want to. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 4 says, "He comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction." If this message put a face in front of you today, write in the comments, "Lord, keep me quiet in a sick room." And if you know somebody who has been sick long enough that the visit stopped, share this video with them. Or better, go and see them this week. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep growing together in biblical wisdom every single week. God bless you, my brother, my sister. Until next time.